The night it all began didn't feel real at first. It felt like a moment that should have belonged in a horror movie, not inside the quiet two-story home on Pinecrest Drive, where neighbors believed Michael and Rachel Turner lived the kind of ordinary life everyone trusted. But nothing about that night was ordinary. Nothing about what Rachel found under that blanket would ever leave her mind again. She had walked into the bedroom with a purpose. For weeks, a sour, decaying odor had clung to the air inside the house, stronger each day, impossible to ignore. She'd scrubbed the kitchen, emptied the fridge, thrown out trash bags that weren't even full. Yet the smell followed Michael like a shadow. It clung to his clothes, seeped into the sheets, lingered in the hallway long after he passed by. Tonight, she was done pretending she didn't notice. Something was wrong. Something he wouldn't say out loud. And Rachel Turner was not a woman who stayed silent when something felt off. Michael lay half asleep, face down, mumbling when she switched on the bedside lamp. The yellow glow filled the room, sharp and unforgiving. Rachel stepped closer, her heart pounding as the smell hit her full force, raw, rotten, heavy. Not the scent of sweat or an unwashed body. This was something else, something sick. "Michael," she said quietly, her voice trembling even before she realized why. "What is that smell? What's going on with you?" He didn't answer, just groaned, turned away. She'd been brushed off too many times. Not tonight. She grabbed the edge of the blanket and pulled. What she saw froze her breath in her chest. At first it was just discoloration, angry red patches, skin that looked torn and infected, wounds that had cracked open and never healed. But then her eyes adjusted to the light. Something moved. Something small and white wriggled across the exposed flesh. One tiny worm, then another, then dozens. Joy, crawling across her husband's genitals. They weren't just on the surface. They were burrowing into swollen wounds, slipping in and out of open lesions like the flesh beneath them was already dead. Rachel stumbled backward, her hand flying in her mouth to keep from screaming. Her stomach flipped violently. Her eyes blurred. For a split second, she truly thought she might faint. Michael shot upright the moment he realized she'd seen. "Don't look," he barked, grabbing the blanket and yanking it over his body. His voice cracked with something between panic and rage. "Rachel, just don't. Michael, oh my God, what is happening to you?" Rachel could barely speak. Shock made her voice thin, strangled. "What is that? What did you do to yourself?" He said nothing. His jaw clenched so tight the muscles twitched. Sweat beaded on his forehead, as if shame itself was suffocating him. Rachel backed up until she hit the dresser behind her. The room felt smaller by the second, the smell clawing its way into her throat. Questions flooded her mind so fast she couldn't keep up with them. Had he been cheating? Had he caught some disease? Was this something he brought into their home, into their bed, into her life without a word? Every possibility was worse than the last. "How long has this been happening?" she demanded, her voice rising as fury began replacing fear. "Weeks? Months? You've been hiding this from me? From us? What did you get yourself into, Michael? Who were you with?" He turned away, his breathing frantic, his hands shaking as he clutched the blanket like a shield. "Stop asking," he muttered. "Stop asking." Rachel stepped closer, her shock boiling into betrayal. "There are maggots crawling on you. Do you think I can just pretend I didn't see that?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence said everything. She paced the room, trying to pull herself together. Every memory of the past few months suddenly made sense. The locked bathroom doors, the black trash bags he took out himself, the mood swings, the way he flinched when she touched him. It all added up to something bigger than disease. It added up to lies. "This is why you wouldn't let me near you," she said quietly, almost to herself. "This is why you pushed me away." Michael's eyes snapped up, anger flaring through the shame. "You don't understand," he growled. "Then explain it to me." "I said you don't understand." Rachel stared at him, really stared. The man on the bed wasn't the husband she thought she knew. He wasn't the quiet, dependable mechanic the neighbors waved at every morning. He was someone else. Someone hiding something so grotesque, so humiliating, he'd rather let his body rot than tell the truth. And in that moment, she realized something that made her chest tighten. He wasn't just sick. He was dangerous. "Michael," she whispered, backing toward the door. "If you don't tell me what's going on, I will find out myself. I'll go to the doctor. I'll go to the police. People will know." He froze. His eyes went cold. Not scared, not sad cold. Rachel felt it. The shift in the air. The way the room suddenly felt unsafe. She left the bedroom trembling. The image of those maggots burned into her mind. Behind her, Michael sat in silence, breathing hard, gripping the blanket like a man watching his whole world crumble. By morning, one of them would be dead, and Briarwood would never be the same again. For anyone in Briarwood looking in from the outside, the Turners always seemed steady, maybe not perfect, but close enough. Michael was the quiet type, the kind of man who fixed his neighbors' lawnmowers without charging a dime. Rachel was warm, involved in everything from church bake sales to school fundraisers. They weren't the couple anyone expected to spiral into tragedy. But the truth was, the unraveling had begun long before the night Rachel lifted that blanket. The seeds of horror had been growing silently for months, hidden behind closed doors and polite smiles. It started subtly, small things Rachel noticed but couldn't quite explain. A strange odor on Michael's clothes, something sharp and sour, like metal and decay mixed together. At first, she chalked it up to his job at the auto shop. Maybe he'd worked with chemicals, maybe oil spilled, maybe the heat made it worse. But the smell didn't go away. In fact, it got stronger. It followed him into the kitchen. It hovered in the hallway after he walked through. It clung to the bedsheets, no matter how much she washed them. Michael seemed to notice her noticing. That was when the distance began. He stopped kissing her goodnight. He turned away when she leaned against him on the couch. If she rested her hand on his back, he flinched like she'd touched an open wound. The man who used to be tender, who used to run his hands along her shoulders after a long day, now stiffened at even the slightest contact. Just tired, he'd snap whenever she asked if something was wrong. "Tired doesn't smell like that," she murmured once, too quiet for him to hear. The next shift came in his routines. He started taking longer showers, 30, 40 minutes at a time. The bathroom door stayed locked. Not just closed, locked. She'd knock and hear water running, but not the sound of him moving around. Sometimes it was just silence. Once, she heard him crying. That scared her more than anything. One night, she found a black trash bag shoved behind the laundry hamper. She touched it, felt something wet inside, and realized it was heavy with clothing. When she opened it, Michael suddenly appeared in the doorway, snatching it from her hands so fast she stumbled. "What are you doing?" he shouted, his voice shaking. Not with anger, but something closer to panic. "You threw your clothes in here. They were soaking. They smelled. Just leave it, Rachel." He stormed out, carrying the bag to the garage. She heard the door slam hard enough to rattle the picture frames on the wall. That was the first night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake next to him, staring at the ceiling while he breathed in uneven, nervous bursts. The next morning, she told her sister over coffee, "I think something is wrong with Michael. Really wrong." Her sister asked the obvious questions. Was he cheating? Using drugs? Depressed? But Rachel couldn't answer any of them. She didn't know. She only knew the man sleeping in her house wasn't the man she married. And then came the mood swings. Michael snapped at little things. The TV volume, the mail being late, a spoon left in the sink. Some days he barely spoke. Other times he muttered to himself, pacing the living room like he was rehearsing a conversation he was too afraid to have. Once, after she tried to hug him from behind while he was cooking, he jerked so violently the pan clattered onto the stove. "Don't touch me," he yelled, his voice cracking. Rachel stood frozen, her arms still half open. She'd never seen him look at her that way, with a mix of terror and shame, like her hand were knives. "Michael, what's happening to you?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He just grabbed his keys and left. Weeks passed, and the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a place where something was festering, something she couldn't name. She cleaned obsessively, lit candles, opened windows, washed sheets twice a week. But nothing helped. The smell grew stronger, thicker, following her husband like a warning she didn't yet understand. The neighbors noticed the tension too. They weren't close enough to ask, but they heard Ray's voices through the Turner windows more than once. Rachel's voice, sharp, hurt. Michael's voice, low, angry, almost like a growl. No one stepped in. Briarwood was the kind of town where people minded their business. But if anyone had paid attention, if anyone had asked the right question, they might have seen what was coming. They might have realized the Turner's perfect facade had already cracked. Because while Rachel was desperate to understand what her husband was hiding, Michael was working just as hard to bury it. He was hiding more than infection, more than decay. He was hiding a secret he knew could destroy him, and he was willing to do anything to keep her from exposing it. That final night in the Turner household didn't explode all at once. It burned slowly, like a fuse creeping toward a bomb Rachel never realized she was lighting. When she walked out of the bedroom after seeing the maggots, she wasn't thinking about danger. She was thinking about betrayal, disgust, and the terrifying realization that her husband had been hiding something that could have infected her, harmed her, maybe even killed her. But Michael, he wasn't thinking about disease. He was thinking about exposure, humiliation, the end of the carefully crafted image he'd built in the small town of Briarwood. And it was that fear, not the infection eating his body, that twisted something dark inside him. Rachel stormed down the hallway, pacing between the kitchen and living room, trying to steady her breath. She could still see them, those tiny white bodies writhing inside his wounds, flashing across her vision like strobe lights. Every time she blinked, the image came back sharper. She tried to swallow the nausea, but it rose in waves. In the bedroom, Michael sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the blanket so hard his knuckles turned white. His chest heaved with shallow breaths. He was sweating, shaking, muttering to himself the way she'd heard him do in recent weeks. Except now it wasn't just fear, it was panic. Pure, suffocating panic. Rachel re-entered the room, voice trembling but fierce. "You're going to tell me what's going on," she said, standing near the doorway, as if she needed an escape route. "No more lies, Michael. No more excuses." He didn't look at her. "Were you with someone?" she continued. "Is that how this happened? Did you cheat on me? Did you give us some kind of disease? My God, Michael, what have you been doing?" Still nothing. His silence felt like a physical blow. That was when her shock hardened into fury. "If you don't talk," she snapped, "I'll find out myself. I'll go to the hospital. I'll tell my sister. I'll tell the police if I have to." Her voice cracked, but her resolve didn't. "People will know what you've been hiding." Those words hit him like a hammer. Michael's head jerked up. His eyes, wide and bloodshot, locked onto hers with something she'd never seen before. Not anger, not shame, fear. But fear can be dangerous when it mutates. Rachel turned and grabbed her phone from the dresser. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely type, but she managed to start a text to her sister. "I need to tell you something about Michael. It's worse than I thought." She stopped mid-sentence when Michael's reflection appeared behind her in the mirror. "Give me the phone," he said, his voice low, too low. She spun around, clutching the phone to her chest. "No, I'm done covering for you." He stepped toward her. "I said give it to me." She backed up quickly, bumping against the dresser. "Don't you dare touch me." He lunged. Rachel dodged him and ran out of the room, slamming the door to the living room behind her. Her heart was thundering. She fumbled with her phone, trying to finish the message, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Michael pounded on the door once, twice, then stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the noise. She heard him move through the hallway. Slow, heavy, like a predator pacing outside the cage. After a minute, the footsteps retreated. Rachel sagged with relief. She grabbed a blanket and curled up on the living room couch. She didn't dare sleep. The house felt wrong, like the walls were listening, like the air itself was charged with something violent waiting to break loose. In the bedroom, Michael sat alone in the dark, elbows on his knees, hands pressed to his head. He was losing everything. Rachel, his reputation, the illusion of normalcy he'd clung to while his body decayed underneath him. He pictured the townspeople whispering, his coworkers laughing behind his back, people avoiding him. He imagined being known as the monster his own wife recoiled from. Humiliation, exposure, the death of the person he pretended to be. The thought felt like drowning. Sometime after 3 a.m., he stood, walked to the bathroom, and stared at himself in the mirror. The man looking back at him wasn't someone he recognized. He saw the infection, the rot, the shame. And then he saw something else. A solution. A terrible, irreversible solution. By dawn, Rachel had made up her mind. She grabbed her keys and purse. She was going to leave the house, get help, tell the truth. She wasn't going to stay silent another day. But Michael had made up his mind too. As she reached the bedroom doorway to grab her shoes, he appeared in front of her, blocking the exit, eyes hollow, jaw tight. "Rachel," he said quietly, "we need to talk." It would be the last conversation she ever had, because on that final morning, fear and shame collided in a way that would end in murder. Morning didn't arrive with screaming or chaos. It came quietly, too quietly. A pale strip of sunlight slipped through the blinds, the air thick and unmoving, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Rachel Turner slowly sat up on the living room couch, her body aching from a night spent trembling more than sleeping. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw them again, those white maggots writhing on her husband's flesh. The image clung to her like a stain she couldn't scrub off. But today, she wasn't going to freeze. She wasn't going to wait for another lie or another excuse. She'd made up her mind. She was leaving that house, finding help, and telling someone, anyone, the truth about what she saw. Whatever Michael was hiding, whatever disease he had brought into their home, she refused to let it consume her too. She stood, adjusted her shirt, and took a shaky breath before heading down the hallway. She needed her shoes, her purse, her keys. She needed out. What she didn't know was that Michael had been awake for hours. He hadn't slept. He sat in the darkness of their bedroom, staring at the door like it was the last barrier between him and the collapse of everything he'd ever built. And now, he heard her footsteps approaching. Each one sounded like a countdown. When Rachel pushed open the bedroom door, she froze. Michael was standing right there. He looked different. Hollow spots under his eyes, face drained of color, an expression that was somewhere between numb and terrifyingly alert. "We need to talk," he said, voice low and strained. "No, Michael," Rachel replied, her voice steady but frayed. "I'm leaving. I can't stay here another second." She tried to pass him, but he stepped into her path, blocking her. A cold shiver ran down her spine. "Move," Rachel said sharply. "I don't want to fight anymore." He didn't move. "No one has to know," he murmured. "No one can know." Rachel's heartbeat picked up. "Listen to me." "I'm not." She never finished the sentence. Michael lunged. Instinct took over. She stumbled backward, grabbing the edge of the dresser to keep from falling. Michael seized her arm, squeezing so tightly she cried out in pain. She fought back, clawing at him, pushing hard against his chest. "Let go of me," she screamed. The struggle sent the bedside lamp crashing to the floor, shattering. The sound echoed through the room like a warning shot. Rachel tried to run, but Michael shoved her down. Before she could get up, he was on top of her, his hands clamping around her throat. "You don't understand," he choked out. "You're going to ruin me." Rachel gasped, her fingers digging into his arms, her legs kicking, her eyes wide with panic. She tried to speak, tried to beg, but the pressure on her throat cut off every sound. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clawed at him, leaving deep scratches that bled instantly. "Michael, stop!" She managed to rasp, but it only came out as a whisper. He didn't stop. Shame, fear, and desperation had swallowed him whole. The man she married wasn't the man strangling the life out of her now. This was someone else, someone willing to kill, to keep his secret buried. It didn't take long, less than a minute. But to Rachel, fighting for every second of air, it was an eternity. Her efforts slowed. Her hands slipped from his arms. Her legs stopped kicking. Her eyes, once sharp with terror, glazed over as her body went still beneath him. Michael's breath rattled as he finally let go. He backed away on his knees, staring at her motionless form on the carpet. Her hair was spread across her face, one hand still raised as if frozen mid-fight. There was no rise and fall of breath. No sound. No Rachel. "No, no," he whispered, touching her cheek. It was already cooling, but his voice didn't sound like a grieving husband. It sounded like a man realizing what he'd just done, what he had to cover up. A minute later, he grabbed his phone and dialed 911. His voice cracked, but the words were steady, too steady. "My wife, she fell," he stammered. "She's not breathing. Please hurry." 10 minutes later, paramedics and officers stepped inside the home. The sour smell in the air hit them instantly. Heavy, rotting, unforgettable. And within seconds of seeing Rachel on the floor, they all knew one thing. This wasn't a fall. It was murder. Detectives Jenna Cole and Ryan Patel had seen their share of tragedies in Briarwood, but the moment they stepped into the Turner home, both felt something twist in their guts. It wasn't just the sight of Rachel lying lifeless on the bedroom floor. It was the smell, heavy, sour, rotten, that lingered in the air like a warning. Paramedics were already packing up their equipment, exchanging looks that said everything without a word. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't even close. Jenna crouched beside Rachel's body, her sharp eyes scanning every inch. The bruising on the neck, the defensive cuts on the arms, the overturned nightstand, the shattered lamp. Nothing about this resembled a fall, no matter how many times Michael Turner insisted it was. Ryan stood a few feet away, watching Michael pace with jittery movements. His eyes were red, not from crying, but from lack of sleep. His t-shirt was wrinkled, stained near the collar, and he kept rubbing his hands together like he was trying to scrub something off. "Mr. Turner," Ryan said calmly, "can you walk me through exactly what happened this morning?" Michael swallowed hard. She was leaving the bedroom. She slipped. She fell. I heard a thud. I came running." Jenna and Ryan exchanged a glance. "What time was this?" Jenna asked. "Around," Michael hesitated. 7? Maybe 6:30? I don't know. But when Ryan quietly checked the 911 timestamp, the call had come in at 7:15. And Michael's uncertainty wasn't the uncertainty of a shocked husband. It was the wobbling timeline of a man trying to figure out which version of the story sounded the least suspicious. Meanwhile, crime scene technicians were already dusting surfaces and photographing every angle of the room. One of them lifted Rachel's hand and paused. Her nails had fragments of skin under them, clear signs she had fought back. Jenna stood and approached the bedroom closet. Something caught her eye, something faint but definite. A black plastic trash bag shoved behind a pile of shoes. She pulled it out slowly. The smell hit instantly. "Jesus," one of the techs muttered, taking a step back. Jenna opened the bag just enough to peek inside. Balled-up clothes, soaked in what looked like blood and pus. A few white larvae moved among the fabric. "Get this to the lab," she said, swallowing her disgust. "Now!" Out in the hallway, Rachel's cell phone was lying on the dresser. Jenna tapped the screen. A message thread opened, her sister's name at the top. And at the bottom, one unsent message. "I need to tell you something about Michael. It's worse than I thought." Jenna's expression hardened. When she stepped into the kitchen where Michael sat hunched over the table, she already knew this wasn't just domestic tension. It was a storm that had been building for months. "Michael," she said evenly, "can you explain the bruising on your wife's neck?" He flinched, eyes darting away. She grabbed me when she fell. Maybe I tried to lift her. I don't know. That's not how bruises form," Jenna replied. "And you have scratches on your arms." Michael's face flushed. "I tried CPR. Your hands don't show any signs of CPR," Ryan said, stepping forward. "No redness. No compression marks." Michael said nothing. Outside, neighbors were gathering on the sidewalk, whispering as police cars lined the street. Some pointed at the house. Others shook their heads, murmuring that they knew something was off lately. But inside, the real story was beginning to unfold. As techs continued to comb through the house, they found more black trash bags, hidden behind the water heater, stuffed under the basement stairs. Every single one held clothing or towels, soaked with fluids, some still crawling with larvae. The stench was so powerful that the team had to take fresh air breaks every few minutes. "Whatever's happening with this guy," Ryan muttered, "it's been going on for a long time." When they brought Michael to the station for questioning, he crumbled under the fluorescent lights. His version of events shifted again. She slipped in the bathroom. No, she tripped over the rug. No, maybe she fainted. Jenna didn't need years of training to see the lie unraveling. But the moment that sealed her instincts came when he snapped. You don't know what she saw. Jenna paused her questioning. What did she see, Michael? He froze. Silence. That silence was louder than any confession. By afternoon, lab results from the trash bags confirmed their worst suspicion. Michael wasn't just hiding a medical condition. He was hiding an advanced, untreated, sexually transmitted infection so severe that it caused necrotic wounds. Wounds that explained the maggots Rachel discovered. Now the motive came into focus. Rachel found out. She threatened to tell. And Michael couldn't let that happen. The case was no longer a mystery. It was a hunt for evidence strong enough to put a murderer away for decades. And detectives Jenna Cole and Ryan Patel were just getting started. The truth about Michael Turner's body didn't come from his words. It came from science, from cold, clinical facts that stripped away every lie he tried to hide behind. And when the lab results arrived at the Briarwood Sheriff's Office that afternoon, detectives Jenna Cole and Ryan Patel finally understood why Rachel Turner had been killed. What she saw wasn't just shocking. It was the kind of truth that could destroy a man's reputation, his marriage, and his entire identity. Michael wasn't merely sick. His body was rotting. The first breakthrough came from the black trash bags Jenna had collected. In a sterile lab room across town, forensic techs tore them open with gloves and masks. But even that wasn't enough. The smell inside was so powerful that one technician had to step out and vomit in a waste bin. Inside the bags were towels stiff with dried fluids, underwear soaked with blood and pus, and tissues crawling with tiny white larvae. These weren't signs of short-term infection. These were signs that something had been progressing for months, maybe years. The medical examiner took samples from the clothing and performed preliminary tests. What she found made her stop in disbelief. She called Jenna personally. Detective Cole, I think you need to hear this in person. In the medical examiner's office, under harsh fluorescent lights, the truth came out piece by piece. Michael Turner was suffering from tertiary syphilis, the final and most severe stage of the disease, something that happens only when someone ignores symptoms for years. His wounds weren't simple sores. They were necrotic lesions, sections of flesh that had literally died while still attached to his body, creating perfect conditions for maggots to feed. His body has been decaying from the inside out, the examiner said. This isn't normal neglect. This is extreme, prolonged, and willful. She explained that in rare cases, extremely rare, untreated syphilis can advance to the point where skin breaks open and becomes infected with bacteria and insects. Maggots don't appear on healthy skin. They appear on dead tissue on rot. Rachel hadn't imagined a thing. What she saw, the examiner added, would horrify any person alive. Jenna felt a chill move through her. She pictured Rachel recoiling, screaming into her hands, her entire world collapsing in a single moment. She understood now why Rachel panicked, why she wanted to leave, why she tried to tell someone. And she understood why Michael snapped. But the medical report was only the beginning. Ryan had been digging into Michael's digital footprint, and what he uncovered painted the clearest picture of all. Michael's laptop history with a roadmap of fear, desperation, and intent. Over the past month, he had searched maggots under skin treatment, flesh-eating infection private clinic. Can maggots mean disease is terminal? How to kill wife quietly? How long before strangulation kills? Wife threatening to expose me, what do I do? It was all there, laid out in his own words. Looks like he was researching two things, Ryan said. How to hide his condition, and how to get rid of the only witness. There were also unsent emails in Michael's drafts. One begging an old girlfriend not to say anything about what happened in Vegas. Another asking about private medical clinics that didn't report to insurance companies. He was frantic, cornered, drowning in his own secret. And Rachel? She was the match that lit the fuse. Friends told Jenna the same things. Rachel had been scared. She had been crying on the phone. She told people she felt like something was eating away at her husband, literally and figuratively. She said she was afraid for her own safety. In her final message, she wrote the last words she would ever send. I need to tell you something about Michael. It's worse than I thought. The medical examiner delivered one last detail, the one that tied everything together. When she confronted him, she said softly, he would have known he couldn't hide it anymore. The smell, the lesions, the maggots, this wasn't a secret that could stay buried. Jenna nodded grimly. So he made sure she stayed quiet. The examiner didn't disagree. Before leaving, Jenna asked, if he had gotten treatment earlier, could this have been stopped? In the beginning? Absolutely. It's one of the most treatable diseases in the world, if the patient seeks help. But he didn't. The examiner's voice was flat. He chose denial, and it cost Rachel her life. It wasn't just a medical tragedy. It was a story of shame so powerful it turned into violence. A man so terrified of humiliation that he let his own body rot and killed his wife to keep anyone from knowing. For detectives Jenna Cole and Ryan Patel, the motive was no longer a mystery. Michael Turner wasn't fighting a disease. He was fighting exposure. And Rachel was the one person who saw the truth he would rather die or kill than let the world see. The courtroom looked less like a place of justice and more like the center of a national storm. By the time State of Oregon versus Michael Turner began, the case had already gone viral across every social platform in America. Cable news debated it nightly. Podcasts broke down every disturbing detail. Hashtags like hashtag Maggot Murder, hashtag Justice for Rachel, and hashtag Rotting Husband Case trended for weeks. Everyone knew the story, but no one was prepared for what they were about to hear inside that courtroom. Michael Turner entered in an orange jumpsuit, shackled at the wrists and ankles, looking nothing like the stable family man the neighborhood once admired. His face seemed hollowed out, part fear, part humiliation, part exhaustion. But the cameras didn't care. They captured every blink, every twitch, every attempt he made to avoid the eyes of the crowd. The prosecution's opening statement hit like a sledgehammer. District Attorney Charlotte Wynn stood tall before the jury and said, Rachel Turner discovered a secret so grotesque, so humiliating, that her husband chose murder over truth. He didn't lose control. He made a choice. The jury was silent. The gallery, full of reporters, victims' advocates, and curious locals, seemed to hold their breath. Wynn promised to expose everything. The maggot-infested clothes, the necrotic infection, the unsent text on Rachel's phone, and Michael's internet searches, especially the ones about strangulation. The defense countered with a desperate narrative that Rachel's death was a tragic accident, the result of a marital argument gone too far. But as the testimony unfolded, the defense's version of events crumbled almost instantly. The first bombshell came from Detective Jenna Cole. Calm, precise, and unshakable, she walked the jury through the crime scene photos. Rachel's bruised neck, the overturned lamp, her half-written text message glowing on the lock screen. Then she read the text aloud. I need to tell you something about Michael. It's worse than I thought. The unfinished sentence filled the room like a ghost. Next came the medical examiner, whose testimony shook even seasoned reporters. She explained Michael's tertiary syphilis, his untreated infections, how parts of his flesh had turned necrotic. She described the presence of maggots, how they feed only on dead tissue, making it scientifically impossible for this to be recent. This level of decay requires months, she testified. Years even. Gasps rippled across the room. One juror visibly recoiled. But the most devastating blow came when the prosecution revealed Michael's search history. Projected on a giant screen, the words filled the courtroom. How long before strangulation kills? How to kill wife quietly. Wife threatening to expose me, what do I do? The defense objected, claiming the searches were taken out of context, but there was no context that could save him. Against the advice of his attorney, Michael insisted on testifying. At first, he tried to paint himself as a broken man, overwhelmed by illness, terrified of losing his marriage. His voice trembled, and he wiped tears from his eyes. Some jurors seemed almost sympathetic, but D.A. Wynn wasn't fooled. She moved in for the kill. Mr. Turner, did you fear your wife would tell others what she saw? Michael hesitated. She didn't understand. Did you search how to kill wife quietly? Yes or no? Michael's mask cracked. I was desperate. She was going to ruin me. Those words, ruin me, sealed his fate. The courtroom exploded with whispers. One juror closed her eyes. Another shook his head. Wynn stepped forward. So she didn't die because you lost control. She died because she threatened your reputation. Michael didn't answer. He didn't have to. The truth was already in the room. The jury deliberated for just 7 hours, an astonishingly short time for a murder trial with national attention. When they returned, the courtroom went silent. The foreman stood. We find the defendant, Michael Turner, guilty of second-degree murder. Rachel's sister sobbed. Reporters scrambled. Michael slumped forward, his shackles clinking. He was later sentenced to 40 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 25. Outside the courthouse, a sea of cameras waited, capturing the headline that flashed across every major network. Maggot murder. Husband convicted after wife discovers rotting infection. The trial didn't just convict Michael Turner. It exposed him. It stripped him bare. It turned a private nightmare into a national warning about secrets, shame, and the deadly cost of silence. The day Michael Turner was sentenced felt like the closing of a chapter, but not the ending of the story. Not for Rachel's family, not for Maplewood, and certainly not for a country that had watched the case unfold like a nightmare in slow motion. When the judge pronounced 40 years in state prison, the courtroom was silent except for the clinking of Michael's shackles. He didn't look angry. He didn't cry. He simply stared down at the table, hands trembling, jaw clenched, as if the weight of the truth had finally crushed the last pieces of the man he once pretended to be. For Rachel's sister, it wasn't justice. It was the closest thing the law could offer. She later said in an interview, Rachel deserved a life. Michael took that. No sentence will ever balance that scale. And she was right. But while Michael was escorted out of the courtroom, the world outside was only beginning to absorb the impact of what had happened behind those suburban walls. Maplewood became two things overnight: a landmark for tragedy and a mirror Americans couldn't look away from. People slowed their cars as they passed the Turner home, its windows dark, its lawn overgrown. Kids whispered rumors at bus stops. Neighbors talked about how they wished they had checked in, wished they had asked more questions, wished they had listened. The Harper house had once blended perfectly into the quiet rows of middle-class comfort. Now it felt radioactive, a place where secrets had been allowed to rot until they became deadly. Domestic violence organizations seized the moment. They printed flyers with Rachel's name, launched awareness campaigns, and created hotline ads featuring the message Rachel never got to send. Silence kills. Doctors used the case in medical conferences, pointing to the dangers of untreated STDs and the deadly shame that keeps people from seeking help. Therapists spoke on the news about isolation, rage, and the psychology behind men who kill when threatened with exposure. Rachel had become more than a victim. She had become a symbol, not of weakness, but of warning. Michael Turner entered the Oregon State Penitentiary with a reputation so notorious that he didn't need to introduce himself. Inmates already knew him as Rotten Mike. Some mocked him. Some avoided him. Some whispered that he deserved what happened to him. But the humiliation he had killed to avoid found him anyway. And in prison, humiliation is a currency, one that strips a man down until all that's left is whatever truth he tried so hard to bury. His infection was finally treated, but the damage was permanent. Tertiary syphilis had already shredded his health, physically, mentally, emotionally. Guards said he kept mostly to himself, quiet, pale, aging twice as fast as anyone else in his unit. He would live, but he would never escape the truth. And he would never escape Rachel's last fight. For her family, grief didn't end with a guilty verdict. It settled into their bones, into every holiday, every birthday, every memory that should have been shared but now belonged only to the past. But from that grief came something powerful. Rachel's sister created the Rachel Turner Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting women who fear for their safety in their own homes. They held workshops, funded emergency housing, and partnered with local clinics to encourage treatment for stigmatized illnesses, especially those people are too ashamed to face. Within a year, the foundation had saved dozens of women. By year 3, hundreds. At every event, her sister began with the same words. Rachel tried to speak. We must speak for the women who can't. Online, Rachel's story continued to resonate. Survivors shared their experiences, thanking her for giving them the courage to leave, to confront their partners, to get help before it was too late. Her final act, walking into a bedroom and refusing to look away, became her legacy. Even today, the Turner home sits quiet on its corner lot, the curtains drawn, the mailbox rusted. Some neighbors avoid the street entirely. Others slow down, bowing their heads as they pass. Because the house is no longer just a house. It is a reminder of what might happen when secrets fester, when shame grows stronger than love, when fear becomes more powerful than truth. It is a reminder that Rachel fought, that she tried to escape, that she tried to tell someone. It is a reminder of the question she never got to answer. How many lives would change if we stopped burying the things that terrify us? Rachel Turner will never grow older, but her story will. It will spread, echo, and warn. And long after her husband's 40-year sentence is forgotten, her legacy will still be whispering through Maplewood. Don't stay silent. Don't look away. Don't ignore the truth, no matter how grotesque it is.